In this week's Bizline, Vietnam's e-commerce to reach $20 billion by year end. And later on, sustainable development of e-commerce, driving force for the digital economy. Hello there and welcome to Bizline, our weekly economic journal on VTV International. You're with me, Hoàng Hằng. Now, e-commerce is an important part of the digital economy. In recent years, especially since COVID-19, e-commerce has grown strongly and become a pioneer field, leading the digital economy, and is forecast to account for 65% of the value of Vietnam's digital economy by 2025. This is according to data in reports from Google, Temasek, and Bain Company. However, in order to post further achievements, sustainable development is an inevitable trend. To this end, this week Bizline deep dives into the main growth drivers for Vietnam's booming e-commerce sector and how it navigates the waves toward a sustainable digital economy in the coming time. First, let's review the sector's notable achievements in recent times.
Vietnam's e-commerce market hit $14 billion in 2022 and may reach as high as $32 billion by 2025, according to the 2022 economy report by Google, Temasek, and Bain Company. The sector is projected to continue booming in 2023 and increase by 25% to $20 billion by the year's end, according to a report on the Vietnam E-Business Index 2023 conducted by the Vietnam E-Commerce Association. Meanwhile, consulting firm Desan Shira and Associates also noted despite the global recession that has hit e-commerce markets in the world's biggest economies, Vietnam appears well positioned, in contrast, and is expected to grow through this phase.
To further discuss the growth drivers of the sector and prospect for sustainable development, we now connect with Mr. Andrea Capagnoli, partner and office head for Bain Company Vietnam. Well, thank you so much for doing the interview. Now, Vietnam's e-commerce market is expected to increase by 25% to $20 billion by year end. So what are the growth drivers for this booming sector?
We think there is a set of fundamental drivers that benefit Vietnam e-commerce. The first one is that you have a large set of aspirational consumers who are very open to trying new technologies and new channels. The second one is that you have a thriving fintech landscape, which is as a lot of things like digital payments. The third one is a more mature logistics sectors where you have a number of players now able to deliver goods in time and at a relatively low cost. Now, those have always been in place. What is driving the growth for the next few years is that to some extent, you have new consumers coming online that previously haven't shopped online. And also you have a set of existing consumers that now have higher confidence and are willing to either buy more goods or trade up in the category of goods that they're buying online. So for example, one day they might be buying shoes and the next day they might be buying a mobile phone or a TV set.
A global recession has hit e-commerce market in the world's biggest economies. How is the current economic climate impacting domestic e-commerce companies in Vietnam?
You see globally and in Vietnam that consumer confidence has declined somewhat. And that typically results in slightly lower spend level, both offline and also online. So we expect that what we call the total GMV in the e-commerce space to still be growing in Vietnam, but perhaps at a slightly lower pace than it would be otherwise. However, it is very, very much worth emphasizing that although the total sales value might not be growing as fast, all of the e-commerce players in Vietnam and in the regions are now focusing on profitability. And we think that actually profits are improving at a much faster pace. Everybody's working on using less incentives and increasing user monetization. So although you might see the top line that perhaps hasn't grown as fast as previous periods, you will see the bottom line improving significantly.
E-commerce markets in developed economies are struggling, but the same may not be experienced in fast-growing and emerging markets like Vietnam. Why Vietnam's e-commerce market may buck the global slowdown?
We think fundamentally Vietnam is a much higher growth economy than others, and that will help the fact that the slowdown will be less severe. But if you look at recent data, you still have somewhat of a slowdown in both offline and online retail as consumer confidence is somewhat eroded. Now, is it better to be an e-commerce player in Vietnam where still you have a baseline growth of, say, 20% year on year? Yeah, absolutely, because you'll feel the slowdown much less than in much more mature and slower growing mature economies. We actually done some research recently that imagine you have 100 people that have tried to use online services for the first time during COVID. So people that weren't buying on e-commerce, but now started buying. Of those 100, we believe that at least 70% actually stayed, quote unquote, online after COVID. So you have really a step up as people were, let's say, forced for the first time to use e-commerce, but then 70% of them stayed and used again. So we think COVID really accelerated what was the online shift in Vietnam.
Vietnam's e-commerce is projected to continue booming in 2023 and developing firmly in the following years, aided by a series of growth drivers, such as the wave of digital transformation, consumers' trust, technological infrastructure, and favorable mechanisms and policies issued by the government.
Cái thương mại điện tử được hoạt động gọi là an toàn, minh bạch và rõ ràng hơn. Đó là về các cái quy định của chính phủ trong thuế, trong bảo mật thông tin, trong các cái giao dịch thương mại điện tử. Cái thứ hai là về thay đổi hành vi của người tiêu dùng, cũng như là cái số lượng người tiêu dùng ngày càng trẻ hóa hơn. Và do đó cái việc tiếp cận thương mại điện tử thông qua các cái công nghệ di động thì ngày càng là nhẹ nhàng và là ngày càng cao. Thứ ba đó là sự phát triển của nền kinh tế số, và cái cuối cùng đó là sự thích nghi nhanh chóng của các doanh nghiệp mà cũng như là các cái nền tảng thương mại điện tử ở Việt Nam.
Cái sức mua của người tiêu dùng trong giai đoạn vừa qua chính là một trong những cái động lực đã giúp cho thương mại điện tử Việt Nam tiếp tục phát triển. Có tới trên 70% người dùng Internet là những người tham gia vào thương mại điện tử. Sức tiêu dùng của thị trường nội địa vẫn tiếp tục tăng trưởng, làm cho thương mại điện tử có khả năng tăng trưởng mạnh và không bị ảnh hưởng bởi sự suy thoái của các nền kinh tế ở các nước trên thế giới.
The sector's strong growth potential and resilience has helped the Vietnamese e-commerce market attract big foreign capital inflows in recent years.
Với nền kinh tế của chúng ta chỉ tăng trưởng khoảng độ từ 6 đến 8% một năm, nhưng mà thương mại điện tử thì luôn tăng trưởng ở mức từ trên 20% trở lên. Thì đây là một cái sự thu hút rất lớn đối với các cái nhà đầu tư từ rất nhiều nền kinh tế, đặc biệt là những nền kinh tế mà cái tốc độ tăng trưởng của họ đã bị chậm lại.
Trong 3 tháng đầu năm của 2023 thì số lượng đầu tư nước ngoài vào các lĩnh vực như là sản xuất, chế biến và bất động sản thì giảm 25% đến 71% so với những thời kỳ trước, tức là số lượng giảm rất là nhiều. Tuy nhiên, lĩnh vực đầu tư nước ngoài vào các lĩnh vực liên quan đến thương mại điện tử như là bán lẻ, vận và kho bãi cũng như là vận chuyển thì lại tăng gấp 2 lần và là tăng 37% trong cái lĩnh vực là vận tải và kho bãi. Như vậy có thể thấy là cái xu hướng của các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài bây giờ là vẫn tập trung vào các cái mảng gọi là hạ tầng phục vụ cho thương mại điện tử.
Industry insiders believe there is still a long way to go for the Vietnamese e-commerce market to reach its peak. So foreign investors could invest in Vietnam early to get ahead of the curve.
The Economy C 2022 report predicts that Vietnam will be the top 3 countries attracting the most investors in the e-commerce sector. What can you say about foreign investors' growing interest in Vietnam's e-commerce sector?
We continue to register. I would say for at least the last 5 to 10 years, there's been really a growing interest in the overall technology sector in Vietnam. Within that technology sector, typically fintech and e-commerce are the two big center of gravity attracting foreign capital. What is really interesting on the e-commerce side is that now some of the companies have reached a scale that allows larger investors to come in. The companies are a little bit more mature and they require more capital, and some of these foreign investors only come when there is a significant opportunity to deploy funds. And we think we're right at the cusp of that of that tipping point now in Vietnam. And when it comes in what sectors or subsectors they invest in within tech, obviously e-commerce is one, and it could be an e-commerce platform, but it could also be e-commerce enablers. Think about logistics system, think about softwares that allow e-commerce players to operate or merchants to operate on e-commerce players. Fintech is another one that includes payments, investment tech, insurtech. All of those are captured in what we would call technology and are all extremely attractive for investor in Vietnam, and they'll continue to be for the next decade for sure.
The bulk of Vietnam's population is under the age of 40 and is incredibly tech-savvy. They have become a driving force for change in consumer behavior in Vietnam. So how would this contribute to e-commerce development in Vietnam?
Absolutely. It's a combination of a young population that is tech-savvy and open to new technology and curious in nature, with the fact that increasing in affluence and GDP per capita allow more people to have smartphones and access effectively aspirational goods that are sold online. So a combination of those two factors is a very, very strong tailwind for the market as a whole.
Consumption habits have changed significantly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Consumers now prefer online shopping to traditional shopping methods. Many individuals and businesses are turning to online channels to promote their products and trade. According to Amazon Global Selling's 2022 report, nearly 10 million products from Vietnamese sellers have been sold to Amazon customers globally, and the number of Vietnamese sellers has increased by 80%. In less than 2 years doing business on Amazon, this business's fully biodegradable plastic products have been sold to tens of thousands of customers in North America. Sales in the first 2 months of this year increased 18 times over the same period last year.
Amazon là một cái thị trường khá là gọi là cởi mở, tức là cái nguồn thông tin nó khá là có sẵn để cho mình có thể hiểu được rằng là cái sản phẩm này nó đang bán tốt hay không tốt và tại sao. Mình hoàn toàn có thể vào đấy mình xem comment của khách hàng về cái sản phẩm đó như thế nào. Thông qua đó thì có thể dễ dàng tiếp cận đến hàng trăm triệu người sử dụng.
To save the cost in building an overseas distribution network, these 3D pop-up cards have been sold through cross-border e-commerce platforms. However, the company is still struggling in its customer base.
Về mặt công nghệ thì bản thân trong các trang thương mại điện tử, đặc biệt là trang của Amazon ấy, thì các thuật toán luôn luôn có sự thay đổi để phù hợp với cả các cái điều kiện của từng các loại hình kinh doanh cũng như các cái tùy từng mặt hàng. Thì đó là một trong những cái mà mình phải có một sự thời gian để mình tìm hiểu. Thì mình đấy là một cái thị trường rất là rộng. Ví dụ như là nói về Mỹ thì người ta muốn một cái gì đó mới lạ, một cái gì đó bắt mắt. Còn ở châu Âu thì người ta theo một cái văn hóa là có một sự trang nhã, có sự cổ điển.
Unlike traditional export, businesses need to pay attention to cross-border operation skills to increase their sales.
If you look at all the top sellers on Amazon, they spend a lot of effort to understand the customer behavior. I would say understanding customer feedback and how to use that feedback into your sales strategy and production strategy. And the second is logistics. Who understand more and spend more effort understanding logistics and how to optimize their cost. That actually creates the difference between those strong performer and the not so strong performers.
Thương mại điện tử Việt Nam còn gặp khó khăn, đó là các doanh nhân Việt Nam chưa mạnh dạn tham gia vào thị trường quốc tế do một số các cái yêu cầu, ví dụ như là về cái năng lực tiếng Anh chẳng hạn. Trong khi đó thì như chúng ta biết về cái kỹ năng về thương mại điện tử của các doanh nhân Việt Nam thì khá là tốt. Thậm chí là khi chúng ta tiến hành triển khai chạy các cái dịch vụ marketing ở trên các thị trường quốc tế, đặc biệt là các thị trường trong khu vực, thì cái doanh số nó cũng phát triển khá là nhanh. Chính vì vậy mà cái việc là nâng cao cái chất lượng sản phẩm và đặc biệt là ứng dụng các công nghệ bảo đảm quyền lợi cho người tiêu dùng sẽ giúp cho thương mại điện tử Việt Nam có khả năng mở rộng cái thị trường quốc tế.
Cross-border e-commerce presents both challenges but also opportunities for Vietnamese businesses to compete and access more professional markets, helping to improve business capacity and product quality.
While e-commerce is an increasingly powerful trend, pandemic fallouts have spurred and opened the way for many Vietnamese businesses to start cross-border sales. What can we expect from cross-border e-commerce in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think we believe it's going to continue to grow in importance. We think ASEAN as a whole is becoming a more integrated region that, again, back to demand for Vietnamese good outside, obviously, but also there's a payment infrastructure. There's a lot of facilitations now for the transporting and the payment of good abroad, and there's more demand for those. So we do believe that this will continue to be an interesting second engine of growth for e-commerce player and for merchants based in Vietnam.
What do you think are the biggest barriers for Vietnamese products sold on international e-commerce platforms? What can be done to further promote sales through cross-border e-commerce?
There's many, but I'll mention a couple. Obviously, there's a part on language that needs to be taken care of. In certain categories, there is traceability of really knowing where the goods have come from and certification for those goods. In certain other sectors, obviously, then there is custom processes and custom clearing processes that needs to be looked after. Those would be three that come to mind. Especially if you look at Vietnam, the story is still that it's an amazingly attractive domestic market, right? That's really, both if you are a domestic company, but also if you're a foreign investors into Vietnam, right? What is really critical is you accessing the sort of 100 million consumers in the country. So for cross-border, definitely logistics, also internet and network coverage. And for that, you need to sort of upgrade your telco infrastructure to make sure that you have the right data transmission. And logistics as well. And it's a cost that will continue to come down as players scale their network.
The 2023 report Sustainable Development of E-commerce, the driving force for the digital economy, said that 2022's gross merchandise value GMV increased 28% over the previous year and is expected to grow 31% at $49 billion by 2025. However, sustainability will be the sector's main development trend in the years to come.
Mô hình kinh doanh và phát triển của thương mại điện tử trong 10 năm sắp tới nó sẽ rất là khác, chỉ có cách làm đi sâu hơn vào trong các cái mô hình, trong cách vận hành, trong cái cách mình đầu tư phát triển. Tôi nghĩ đi vào chiều sâu và hiểu biết người tiêu dùng là một cái chiến lược về lâu về dài nó sẽ tạo ra cú hích tiếp theo cho thương mại điện tử.
Statistics show that 57% of Vietnamese users are starting to move away from products and services that have adverse impacts on the environment and society. As such, prioritizing sustainable and green growth is crucial for the continued development of e-commerce.
Cái sự cạnh tranh khốc liệt giữa các cái trên thị trường thương mại điện tử nói riêng như các thị trường khác thì họ đang tiến dần tới là không chỉ là cạnh tranh về giá mà là họ cạnh tranh về cái giá trị bền vững của cái dịch vụ cũng như là của cái doanh nghiệp. 4 cái yếu tố chính mà trong cái bản báo cáo gần đây thì chúng tôi có phát triển, đó là gì? Phát triển kinh doanh bền vững, phát triển hạ tầng bền vững, phát triển nguồn lực, nhân lực số chất lượng cao và cuối cùng đó là phát triển và ứng dụng công nghệ vào việc nâng cao trải nghiệm khách hàng.
The impressive and steady growth of Vietnam's digital economy in recent years is partly due to the explosion of the e-commerce sector when it accounts for more than 60% of Vietnam's digital economy. Out of the $23 billion value of Vietnam's digital economy in 2022, up to $14 billion came from the e-commerce sector.
Nền kinh tế số thì nó bộc lộ ra bên ngoài chính là sức mua, cầu tiêu dùng của hoạt động thương mại điện tử biểu hiện rất là rõ qua cái tổng mức bán lẻ điện tử của chúng ta là tăng trưởng rất là tốt. Và chính vì vậy thì nền thương mại điện tử Việt Nam sẽ tác động đến các doanh nghiệp làm có một cái sức ép để thúc đẩy họ còn chuyển đổi số nhanh hơn nữa để tận dụng được các cái cơ hội tăng trưởng và khả năng mở rộng quy mô của thương mại điện tử. Và như vậy thì nó sẽ tiếp tục làm động lực cho cái quá trình chuyển đổi số tại Việt Nam và dẫn dắt nền kinh tế số của Việt Nam trong thời gian tới sẽ tăng trưởng mạnh mẽ.
I'm very pleased to see that the government of Vietnam has got digital very high on their agenda, and we believe collectively together between public-private partnerships with the support of right regulations, we can continue to accelerate the e-commerce adoption and the wider digital adoption.
Sustainable e-commerce is gradually becoming a driving force for economic growth and digital economy development in Vietnam. It promotes fast and efficient digital transformation of businesses, at the same time improve digital skills and strongly develop digital consumption of people nationwide.
E-commerce is forecast to account for 65% of the value of Vietnam's digital economy by 2025. However, in order to post further achievements, sustainable development is an inevitable trend. So what factors should Vietnam further improve to develop a sustainable e-commerce market?
There was an initial phase in which the market was growing and the players were really focused on capturing that market share. And rightly so, they were using incentives, also because you needed to persuade a cohort of customers to come online and transact online for the first time. To make the space more sustainable, and this is what the players are already doing now, is scaling back on those incentives. Now that they realize that the customers love the online experience, they're willing to buy more frequently and more, and they don't have to be incentivized as much. On the other side, there's also a number of more sophisticated product and offering that these e-commerce platform can provide to their merchants, for example, to advertise their business, to help them on the logistics, to help them on inventory. And that will further help the unit economics of the e-commerce platform, which will continue to move from loss-making to profit-making. And once they are obviously in the profit-making, once they're making profits, is obviously a much more sustainable and stable e-commerce landscape, and will continue to thrive going forward. I think also ESG and sustainability, which is a very important trend. I think there's a lot that online commerce can do to play their part. Think about optimizing logistics to lower emissions. Think about, which by the way are already lower than typical offline commerce, but they can be lowered even more. And think about packaging and recycling, right? So the idea of actually not receiving all of the packages from your online sales, but can you actually return them to the platform so that they can be used? And there's a lot of work that can be done on waste on that side.
How can sustainable development in e-commerce provide a driving force for the digital economy in Vietnam in the coming years?
The economy per se is very interlinked. Think about, I'll give you a concrete example. Buying goods online as a consumer will open up your experience to online or digital payments, whether it's e-wallets or the likes. At the same time, and payments is another vertical, obviously, of the digital economy. A second vertical that it would be opened up to you as you experience more and more e-commerce shopping is digital lending. You know, we have a flourishment of, for example, buy now, pay later offering, and that is another vertical that is part of the digital economy. So you see how, you know, starting from an online purchase of a product, you've now unlocked digital payment, you've then unlocked digital lending to finance that. And then you see how, you know, the 65% is really signaling how e-commerce is a cornerstone for a lot of these use cases to happen. And then obviously then the sector to flourish. I think it will continue to grow in the slightly lower than historical, especially because of the slowdown for the next maybe 12 to 24 months. But it will pick back up and go back to a historical trend of 25+% growth afterwards.
Well, thank you so much for doing the interview.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks, Alan.
Vietnam's digital economy in 2022 was considered to have the fastest growth in ASEAN. With the current economic uncertainties, sustainable development has become one of the leading and critical goals for the nation's e-commerce industry. As such, e-commerce businesses are advised to promptly seize opportunities and trends in sustainable development and effectively implement sustainable development practices in their plans for growth. And that wraps up this edition of Bizline. Stay with us for more content, or if you're on the go, feel free to download our app VTVgo from App Store or Google Play, or subscribe to our YouTube channel VTV4Go. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.